Hey, what is up? Welcome to this episode of the Entrepreneur to Entrepreneur podcast. As always, I'm your host, Brian Lofermento, and being from Boston, I can confidently say that our guest today is wicked smart. This is a fellow New Englander who's doing incredible things in the world of numbers. Yes, we throw the word data around so much in business and entrepreneurship and when we talk about revenue and KPIs, but today's guest really applies such an not only academic, but practical use of data and numbers and how we can tangibly use it for our own advantage and business growth. So let me tell you all about today's guest. His name is Darren Tapp. Darren earned a PhD in mathematics from Purdue University. His career has been in and out of academia, but currently he's focusing on industry and is interested in solving problems that face your small and medium-sized businesses. He provides business intelligence, data analytics, and logistical solutions. He helps to advance companies using sound mathematical and statistical models, which I'm so excited to get into here in today's episode. He also helps existing teams incorporate better models and statistics into their operations, their monthly check-ins, their reports, all of that, so we can start making the right decisions and start actually growing. We're all going to learn a lot from today's guest, so I'm not going to say anything else. Let's dive straight into my interview with Darren Tapp. All right, Darren, I'm so excited that you're here with us today. First things first, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Heck yes. So obviously, we know that we always hear these big words today, and you've got a lot to live up to because I know that you've got so many valuable insights here. But before we get to the good stuff, Darren, take us beyond the bio. Who's Darren? How'd you start doing all these amazing things and applying it all to business?
Well, and actually, I had a contact to a CEO of a debt collections agency, and he brought me on, and I needed a job, and he's like, well, I have this database, and you'll need to know SQL. So I said, I'll learn SQL. And he said, okay, start learning SQL. You start January 1st or something like that. And so I started to watch SQL videos on YouTube, and I would fall asleep to them. So I'd have to watch them the next day and fall asleep again. So it's a very reliable way to fall asleep, I guess, if you want to learn SQL. But I learned it, and then I was embedded in their team that did a lot of analytics through their database. The team had to manage their database, and it was huge. I consider it kind of a medium-sized company. They had locations in Ohio and New Hampshire, and so I learned it real quick that I came with a different perspective from the mathematics background, and so I think that really fit in really well with the existing team. So that's how I ended up with doing the data analytics. But of course, that wouldn't have been possible if I hadn't had the strong mathematical background to start with.
Yeah, I love that overview. Darren, the question is then, can we learn if we just fall asleep to that material? I've always wondered that.
I think so. There's a lot of overlap with set theory. I think that's kind of why I was falling asleep, and probably the video I picked was maybe a more monotone voice. But I think if you just keep watching it, you will learn. Yes, I mean so it's called this standard query language, and it's actually not a programming language. It's just kind of, so it's not as involved as other things you might learn.
Yeah.
And some of my computer science friends say, since I had so much set theory, I do very well with like the SQL. I'll pick up very quickly.
Yeah, I love it. Here on the show, it's something we talk about frequently is how these skills from our backgrounds, they easily transpose into the thing and extrapolate into the things that we're doing today. I've got to be careful with my math terms with you here, but I will say we love that extrapolation of skills into all these different things because you obviously now in the business world, you help businesses make sense of these complex data sets. And we live in a very data-oriented world. We've got more data and numbers at our fingertips than probably any time in history. So Darren, where was it along the way that you, working in and out of academia, you said, you know what, I've got a big value add for businesses. Not only can I help them with that, but you want to do it on your own accord with your own business. Talk to us about that transition.
Well, I guess it was a very specific problem. So Jason pulled me into his office and said, "Hey, we're collecting on this debt, and we have, we pay money for the credit rating of all the people that owe money," and he said that maybe if we do like a double variable extrapolation, where the first variable is the credit rating, but the second variable is the time the debt has been inactive. And so I looked at both those variables, and sure enough, there was a correlation. So the more recent a debt, the more likely they were to collect on it. And so what I did is I did all the math stuff, the chi-square fits and all that, and I'm worried about the variance and things like that. I ran some simulations and modeled it, and came up with a new metric instead of the credit rating. It was mainly based on the credit rating, but it was just tweaked a little bit based on how old the debt was, and on my different data sets, it did 0.9% better at predicting if they would collect on a debt. And then I got thinking about that 0.9%. When you're collecting on a lot of debt, that's actually a lot of money. And so that's, I was always very happy with that job, but I was like, wow, if I spin out by myself, that's a lot to collect on, right? I was only billing hourly back then. So, but yeah, those hours really probably, I imagine they really paid off for the business.
Yeah. And I think to that point, it really shows the value add when we pay attention to these numbers. I love that. Less than 1%, when you multiply it by a lot of money, that is huge value add. And obviously, I'm just going to take this one quick second to interject to listeners that I think that's important, Darren. The value of your work is not from the mere hours that you work for a client. It is the value that you bring to them. So I think that's such an important entrepreneurial lesson. Let's talk about the data, though, because you're giving this one example, which we love tangible examples here. On your website, you have some real examples of projects and things that you're working on with real life businesses. Talk to us about some of those data sets, because obviously on a really enterprise level, we can think about the millions, probably billions of transactions that your Visas, your Stripe is a tool that a lot of entrepreneurs and listeners are familiar with. We're familiar with those huge data sets. What are we looking at on a more micro level as far as small and medium-sized businesses?
Well, your medium-sized businesses have employees, and you want to be able to understand how employees are doing, especially once you get to the medium-sized, it's kind of hard to keep track of everybody. And you want to also be objective in how you assess your employees. And so if you have a database that's keeping track of what your employees are doing and when and how and the results of such, then you can come up with a report that's based on hard numbers and not just based on, the manager likes you. That can be used, at least I've had companies that want to use that to actually make the employees they have better. Of course, you could identify problems, employees that you might need to let go of, but the main goal is to get the most out of the employees you have. So that's an example of when you have all this data, what you might want to do with it.
Yeah, Darren, I want to ask you this because I'm a big believer, and there's that classic quote that we always hear in business of what gets measured gets managed. And so obviously getting the right data, paying attention to the right data, collecting it this example of employee productivity, for example, that's one thing. How can we as business owners, as entrepreneurs, make sure that we're collecting data in a way that makes it useful so that we actually have business intelligence as opposed to a bunch of spreadsheets, a bunch of automations that we hook up in many different ways?
Well, yeah. So what I do is I make those spreadsheets. I do that automation. So if they're not the right spreadsheet or something, you need to go in there and change the query that's done. You might have to basically you want to record everything you possibly can, and then after the fact you'll figure out what you need. Usually you don't record exactly what you need. You have to kind of calculate based on the raw data. You might calculate, well, here's your percentage. Here's the percentage that the employees is converting or something like that. So you need to, I think you should go back and review those spreadsheets you get and think about how you need them tweaked and all that. And if they do need to be tweaked, as long as the data is in the database, you can do that.
Yeah, but I think that reveals part of your secret sauce, Darren, with your mathematical background about modeling, of you can see things beyond just the numbers, beyond just the spreadsheets that are looking in front of us. You've already used one of my favorite terms, which is what's the word that I want to say when things are correlated? I want to talk about correlation versus causation. That's where my brain is going. I want to say linear regression. So let's talk about correlation versus causation, because for a lot of people without a mathematical background, this is something that can easily be messed up. I remember the first ever econometrics class that I took in college. Our professor had us look at the correlation between the number of sheep in Scotland and ice cream sales in New York City. And of course, it had a high R-squared value. It looked like it was highly correlated. Of course, it was not causation in effect. So, Darren, without going into a full-on dissertation, but knowing that we're being listened to by entrepreneurs around the world, what is that difference? What's the important context for us to understand about correlation versus causation, and how does it play out in real-life data sets?
Well, correlation just means two things are related. When one goes up, one goes down, or vice versa. One goes up, the other goes up. That's a positive correlation in the the example I'm familiar with is drownings and ice cream sales. Those are correlated. You get more drownings when there's more ice cream sales, and that's a correlation. But it's not that ice cream sales cause drowning or drowning causes ice cream sales. It's that there's an outside factor. When it's hot out, they sell more ice cream, and when it's hot out, more people swim, and there's more chance of drowning. So outside factor. There's another example. Oh, this was in the literature of a correlation. So they found a correlation where children who slept with the light on didn't see as well. And the original paper said they didn't know a causal link, but just to be safe, turn the lights off before the kids go to sleep. And then later they learned that parents that are nearsighted are more likely to leave the light on, and parents that are nearsighted are more likely to have children because it's genetic that can't see as well. So that's another example of things being correlated, but not causal. And the example I was doing with the debt collection, I don't think it really mattered if it was a causal relation or not, because you were just trying to pick. You didn't really your choice to go to collect on particular debt didn't really affect the outcome at all. So just knowing there's a correlation, it didn't have to be causal for it to be valuable for the company. And that's a whole hard thing to predict, that's a whole. You can first prove there's a correlation, and then to prove there's a causation, that's more you have to do.
Yeah, makes sense. I'm loving this. As a numbers geek myself, Darren, I love these insights, especially because I want to piggyback off of one of your really tangible real life examples. It's right there on your website. People can go to your website. Listeners, we're going to talk about Darren's website at the end of today's episode, but prior projects, I think it's so cool. And you've given us the example of the employee performance here in our conversation today. I want to ask you this question because it's fun talking to a numbers person like you, where obviously business is a balance of the personal stuff. We're dealing with real life humans, no matter what our business is, but also the data, the numbers that drive business growth, that drive productivity, that drive so many things we do. We have a lot of guests come on and talk about how to manage, teams, how to build a corporate culture. But Darren, you take that other approach of, hey, here's the facts. Let's first and foremost operate from the facts so we can make wise and strategic decisions. Being a numbers person, where is your view on how we integrate these successfully into our business? So let's piggyback off of the employee productivity. How do I, as a business owner, make sure that my employees, my team members, aren't thinking, man, they're just tracking everything. They're going to use these numbers to get on my case about things. How can we make sure we implement it in a way that bolsters our performance?
Well, at least the manager I was working with, their intention was to review it every month. So that, every monthly is not like, oh, you're on your case all the time. And that way the employee can kind of predict how they're doing. The hope is that they would look one check with the report card in 1 month would say, hey, you might need to improve on this metric for next time. And the hope was they actually would improve. And so instead of actually being on their case, you could be just like, oh, great, look at that, wonderful, yeah. And so that's one way to make it feel like that. But it's the approach should be a collaborative when you're dealing with actual hard data with how the employee's doing. It is when somebody gets hired, it should be a collaborative relationship. So just pointing out how the employee's doing should be good. Another thing is I would do every one of those in private. I wouldn't tell one person that they didn't do as well or did better than the other. And yeah.
Yeah, two things I think it's really important to call out for listeners here. One, Darren, you just revealed frequency matters. Of if you and I are meeting once a month, that is a check-in, and it genuinely can be that supportive environment. So I love that insight. And then the second is collaborative. That's such an important thing to bring up in this conversation, is that all of our metrics, all of the teams that we're all building to grow our businesses, it should all be collaborative. We're all in this together. So one of our founding principles, I say it so frequently here on the show, is a rising tide lifts all boats. And I love how it shows up even in your work, Darren, because it's so important. And I want to ask you this question, because looking at your work, it just seems like you obviously have a ton of different skills and all different types of data sets, the way that you approach this, the visualizing of the problems that businesses are facing with the data that they have in front of them. How do you begin to assess the overall landscape? So one example has been employee productivity. When you walk into a business, how is it that you find that value? Where is it? Do you look at sales? Do you look at operations? What is it that makes you say, hey, you guys, there's some answers in your numbers here. Let's poke and prod here. I'm guessing I'm asking Darren, where are you poking and prodding to start going down this path?
Well, it's kind of a general question you're asking. It would depend on the actual the details of the business, but and basically you would want to first determine what success of an employee is. Like if you're a retail store and you have somebody selling something, maybe you would say success is they actually make a sale. But then that's going to be influenced by other things. Like an employee might be working at 3 p.m. on a Tuesday, and that's not prime time shopping. And then another employee might be working on, at 5 p.m. on a Saturday, and people love to go out and shop then. So you would want to somehow account for these differences in times, and so you could kind of actually compare. Oh, you're doing, even though you didn't sell as much on Tuesday, you're doing very well because the person on Saturday had an advantage. So you would want to be able to quantify kind of how each employee should do based on they're not all in the same environment, and actually try to take that noise out of your numbers.
Yeah. And I want to go back to, because when we're talking about using our numbers in this way, it begs the question for a lot of business owners of hearing your skill set, SQL, Python, obviously you're working a lot in Excel. There's so many different tools that you're using. Darren, for your clients and for business owners in any way who want to tap into the data, what does this actual workflow look like? Is this a one-time thing that you go in with these businesses and you set systems up, that you generate these reports for them? Or how can we embed this into our ongoing maintenance and check-ins of our own business metrics so that we can continue to stay on top of this stuff?
So, I could do a one-off problem there. Like some businesses need data analytics done, and they just need that done, and then that's it. But what I'm used to is being basically asked a question every week or so, and then I would go and just go through the database and come up with the answer to the question, and just by that process you get to learn. Basically, every business database is going to be a little bit different. Sometimes it's not documented the best, and So every time you answer a question, you get more and more familiar with the database, and then that starts a relationship where I can become more and more valuable as time goes on.
Yeah, and that's a very important distinction. One of my topics that I'm so excited to talk to you about here today is that essence of time. It's something that we all look at, and I think back to business school where all of our professors tell us to have a 5-year plan, a 10-year plan, and then I can't help but think about 2020 and all of those plans, no matter how far out you were looking, all got thrown out the window. Obviously, the world changed in a lot of ways in 2020. So, Darren, with time being a factor, a variable in all of the data sets that we look at, especially when we talk about future forecasting and modeling, what, with your mathematical hat on, what is your attitude towards time? Obviously, things are always changing, technology's changing. What is a valuable data set for us, whether we're looking backwards of saying, hey, let's look at 6 months of employee data, let's look at 6 months of sales data. Is it a large window of time? Is it a smaller window of time? How do we extrapolate that into the future? I'd love to get inside your mind there.
Yeah, so I was just in a lunch meeting with some coworkers, some colleagues, and there was a successful trading strategy that was being employed in the past, but then I think word about this trading strategy got out, or something happened in the market, and all of a sudden the trading strategy didn't work. So that's an example where there's one time period where certain conditions were met, and somehow things changed after a certain date. So when your question is time, about time, you should pick a time period where you don't think there's been any major changes in your business model. So you mentioned the COVID situation. So now, if you're doing if you're looking back on like 10 or 20 years of, let's say 20 years of data for your business, you might actually just take out that COVID, like the 2 or 3 years of COVID, and just and look at that separately and see if it differs qualitatively from all the others. And if so, you would throw that out. In statistics, that's called what's that called? An outlier. Sometimes you have data, but sometimes there's this outlier that's not going to be the general case. You know, in your retail, you might sell a pair of pants and shirt to somebody, but then somebody comes in and buys, half the store. That's an outlier. Your model can't really predict that you're going to have this outlier that happens in the future. So that's how you pick your time period. You want a time period where it's generally the same, and you would want to throw out any outliers, whether it's an outlier time period or outlier data point.
Yeah, and one word you used earlier in our conversation is noise, obviously. And I think that for so many of us entrepreneurs, acknowledging what is the noise, what are the outliers, what's the stuff that isn't something that is actionable. It's funny for me, as I obviously get to have so many amazing conversations with great entrepreneurs, and a lot of listeners email in and they say, oh, can I do what this person did? Is it going to work for my business? And the reality is, well, their circumstances, what's going on in their life in that time period and the way tech is, radically different than the way that the world is now. So it may or may not be. Chances are it is not replicable. So I think that's really important. Darren, I always appreciate, speaking of those conversations, I always love transitioning these conversations to talk not only as a subject matter expert, but entrepreneur to entrepreneur, because it's easy for someone to look at your business and think, Darren's a numbers person. This is what he does. This is what he's amazing at. I want to get inside your mind as an entrepreneur, because you're not just in the data. You're not just in the numbers for your clients. You are also growing your own business, and you've been at this for quite some time now. We love celebrating entrepreneurial longevity. Talk to us about the approach and how it feels for you that you're not just a practitioner. I know that you've been a professor in the past, and there's so many things in the world of academia that you've done, but how's life different as a business owner, as an entrepreneur who's not just doing what you love, but you're also building a business and doing all the other stuff that comes with it?
Well, it's can be frustrating because the reward is inconsistent. Sometimes there's a big reward, sometimes there's not any reward. So that's a little frustrating with running your own business. Let's see, but I've been able to actually do my own projects, like you mentioned, the projects on the that on the website. So I made a trading bot. I was able to implement that for just myself. And it's a really interesting trading strategy and everything. And so that turned out to help bridge the gap when a client wasn't around. So finding my own projects has been very helpful too. So that's one thing. Yeah, well, if you're going to be an entrepreneur, see what you can do for yourself first, and then help other people as well.
Yeah, I love that advice. And it's such a real life example. It's something that I cherish as part of the entrepreneurial journey, is playing around. For me, obviously, as a podcaster, I love new technologies. I love seeing different AI tools and what they can do with the transcripts of our episodes. It's fun to, whether it ever sees the light of day, Darren, or not, truth be told, it's fun to play around in the playground. And our businesses are an ongoing playground for us to continue growing, for us to continue upskilling and experimenting. So I really appreciate that. I also know that part of what you do is you obviously have Taproot Investments, where you're the chief financial officer. Darren, talk to us about your interests externally, aside from just what you're doing with Tapp Math.
Well, yeah. So, part of just being alive is you want to make sure you're going to be able to handle any situation that happens. And so investing in property seems like something that is something that will pan out no matter what the financial situation turns out in the future. And so it's a little small company that owns a couple commercial spaces and is renting them out. So that's kind of fun. I just worked with a guy that was helping me fix the ramp. So it's funny being an entrepreneur. Like, I can't do not everything I do is the high level math stuff, but it's kind of fun to come back to earth and just make sure the company has a ramp replaced so that they need. So
yeah, and it's funny because that's the real stuff, Darren. I feel like a lot of podcasts and YouTube videos, and especially entrepreneurial and business related books, they don't talk about these realities, which is why we're so appreciative to have you here on the show to talk to us about the varied things of even pulling these in. And I want to ask you this, because knowing that you've been a professor before and you've worked inside of academia and with students who are information sponges looking to learn all the things, I'm curious, what about that part of your backstory and your background and your experiences plays into the way that you do business today? I'm curious if there's things that help you in your customer service, if you take some of those techniques and teaching others that you've implemented into your business practices.
I think the fact that my background as a teacher does really help if I'm embedded into a team that exists already. It seems like, this word is overused, but there can be a synergy between bringing in some outside knowledge and to an already existing team. And so I think that just being a teacher helps me with those human interactions that people have to do. And then let's see, I also think that it does help me train staff. Now, mostly it's informal. Somebody needs to know something. Okay, one of the research projects I did in academia is working with Nicole, and Nicole's like, why do you need this simulation run 5 or 20 times, or how many ever times I asked him to run it? And I told him about the statistics behind it, and so that was a teachable moment, so to speak. That was in academia, but you can see how that would translate to and then when I was embedded in that team working on spreadsheets and such, I was learning from the database people, and they were learning from me. And the one example I did with that regression, the correlation that wasn't that I don't believe was causal. I can't really say it's causal, but with the time of the debt, that correlation problem. That was something I felt like I was specially trained for that the rest of the team couldn't do. And then after I did it, I could explain to the rest of the team why I thought it was a good thing. So it kind of brings in a different perspective, which I think, like you say, a rising tide raises all boats. So I think, yeah, So
yeah. And speaking of the academic background, I do want to tap into, because I found this so fascinating about your background, what you said about ASU, Arizona State University. I think that has clearly left such a big impact on you. I can see from the outside and say that, because so much of your marketing language on your website, the way that your business shows up, you talk about solving those problems. And I know that ASU is kind of also rooted in that way, that problem solving. Talk about what makes ASU's approach different and how it left such an important mark on the way that you see the world and the way you operate.
Yeah. So it just happened, and it was weird. But I went to Purdue, and I think Purdue's a wonderful school, and I based that on the math library being, it always had everything I needed. And my advisor and wonderful professors that were there as well. But when I migrated to Arizona State University, it was kind of just a happy circumstance. I was in industry, and then industry said, "Hey, Darren, join a research team that we're working with ASU, that we're starting a partnership with ASU." And then ASU poached me a year or two later. So ASU as a university is built. They don't build their departments around subjects. And in fact, they're not even called departments, but they build basically departments around types of problems. So, like I was in the automated decision department. I wasn't in the computer science department. There's actually a few departments that might be considered computer science. So I was in the decision, like the computer decision department, and so since they're organized around types of problems, when you want to solve a problem, you don't just, like, you want to solve even a physics problem, you don't necessarily need 20 physicists to do this. You might want to have 3 or 4 physicists, but then bring in a mathematician, maybe an engineer, maybe bring in a kind of a breadth of subjects, and you have a better chance of solving the problem, because with all the different ways of looking at it, if you get stuck in one part, maybe somebody in that breadth that you brought in would be able to deal with that one part. And I think that's a really great way of organizing a university, and it does have an impact on you when you come, because I thought, this is weird, this mathematician and this computer science team. But it's not weird at all. It's like, that's exactly what you would do if you were interested in solving problems, not just advancing knowledge.
Yeah, really well said. I really appreciate those insights, and I so appreciate the way that you articulate it, because, like I said, I think your work exemplifies that approach, and it's such a different way of thinking. So with all of that in mind, Darren, I always like to, this is a selfish way for me to end these episodes, because I truly have no idea which direction you're going to take this question, and you can go anywhere with it, and that is, what's your one piece of advice, the one takeaway for listeners, knowing that we're being listened to by thousands of entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs in over 150 countries at all different stages in their business growth. And you are one of us, Darren. You are a fellow entrepreneur. Right. What's that one piece of advice that you hope they walk away from today's episode with?
Okay. So this is very simple, but if you know your numbers, but specifically know your burn rate and your runway. So you should know all your numbers, but if you don't know any numbers, know how much money you're spending a month in your business, and know how much time you have until you're out of money. That's what your runway is. So those two things are the two things you should know if you don't know anything.
Yeah, I love that. Darren, in over 900 episodes, you're the first one that's the clear takeaway. And you said it's simple, but it is so important.
Like a cliche or something. Everybody's like, don't know these things. Anyway.
No, that's incredible. I absolutely love that. It's because listeners hear me say this every single week. It's my favorite Albert Einstein quote, and it's something that we so appreciate when our guests do it, which is, if you want to impress someone, make it complicated. If you want to help someone, make it simple. And Darren, you've done just that while also challenging us to think differently. So I'm so excited for listeners listeners to go down the Darren rabbit hole with Tapp Math. I think it's so cool. All the things you're doing, all the content that you're putting on your website. I love seeing those real life insights, the work that you're doing, and you do have a knack for making it digestible and simple. So huge kudos to you. With all of that said, drop those links on us. Where can listeners go to learn about all the awesome stuff that you're up to?
Tapmath.com is the where I do most of my business stuff, and then I have DarrenTapp.com, which is about me personally. Those are the websites.
Listeners, you already know the drill. We're making it as easy as possible for you to find Darren and his business online, no matter where it is that you're tuning into today's episode. Scroll right on down and you'll find those links. You can click right on through. His main business website is at tappmath.com. That's tap, T-A-P-P, math.com, just like his last name that you see in the title of this episode. So listeners, don't be shy. And Darren, on behalf of myself and all of our listeners around the world, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you, Brian.